Hello, my name is Barbara Teal. I am the author of the book Desperate Search: An American Family Faces the Horrors of Transnational Human Trafficking. I am here to tell you a little something about my background. I am an Ohio native, born in Cleveland, Ohio, and lived in Ashtabula, Ohio until I was 9 years old. We moved during my growing up years to East Longmeadow, Massachusetts, then back to the Great Lakes state of Michigan. I went to college in Wisconsin. I've had previous careers as managing a travel agency and as a financial planner, where I created and gave seminars to the federal women's groups in Washington, D.C. Regarding fiction writing, my first experience was in 5th grade when my teacher, Miss Petrie, taught us creative writing by putting one word on the board and asking us to write a story around it. I found this fascinating. At the end of the year, she told me to continue writing. However, I did not follow that advice until I retired, thus the completion of Desperate Search, inspired by the information I learned while living in Paris, France. I found that traveling, especially living abroad, has been wonderful and creative in giving me ideas for my fictional stories and their characters. I hope you enjoy them. The title of my book, Desperate Search: An American Family Faces the Horrors of Transnational Human Trafficking. Desperate Search is about 2 girls from Whitefish Bay, Wisconsin, who are in their junior year in college and decide to take a semester abroad at the Sorbonne in Paris, France. They are best friends and always look out for each other. In Paris, they room together in a women's residence, but since they have different majors, they don't see each other during the day. One evening, one of the girls, Melanie, doesn't come back to the residence. Her friend Kim is concerned and reports it to the house mother, but is told to wait until the next morning. By the next day, she hasn't shown up, so Inspector Pierre Dubois is called in to investigate. The investigation takes the inspector and Melanie's mother, Lana, from Paris to Algiers and finally into the Sahara Desert. It becomes a race against time. One slip up and Melanie will disappear forever. The inspiration in writing the book I received when I myself, in my 20s, went to work in Paris. And I was introduced to a gentleman who worked for UNESCO, and he invited me out to dinner to tell me about the good things about Paris and the not so good things about Paris. And he told me about something called white slave trade, which today is now called human trafficking. And he told me to be very careful. It was where young girls would come to the City of Lights to find fame and adventure. In doing so, the girls usually are wooed into going out with some of the men you would actually see standing on the Champs-Elysees. They were mainly from North Africa, very good, tall, good-looking, tall young men, had a lot of money, and they would ask them out. And if the girls got in their car or met them at clubs or something like that, they would never be seen again. The main objective in coming up with this story was when I came home from Paris. Of course, I told my parents and all my friends about this horrible thing called white slave trade, and everybody was just horrified. But we knew that it could never happen in this country. So fast forward to today, and what do you see coming across our open border? You see human trafficking and girls being kidnapped and put into prostitution. And it's all around us now, even in this country. So the idea was to warn young women and try to have them take it seriously, because I was thinking people know about it, but they're not taking it that seriously. My target market for this book would be young women, probably starting even at the age of 12 or 13 and going through into their 20s and into 35 or so, because anybody can be targeted, but it's mainly the young women who are very naive and very trusting of people, but just to be very careful. In addition to that, I also want to tap or have the moms and dads read the book so that they become more serious about this.
and perhaps the family can work as a unit in keeping each other safe. The book is derived, as I mentioned earlier, from my meeting a gentleman who called me up and asked me out to dinner. He worked for UNESCO, which is the United Nations Education, Cultural, and Scientific Organization, and he was the one who warned me, because his organization helps around the world protecting young women and children. And that's why, and they have a huge department trying to solve this human trafficking problem. You know, I've always wanted to write fiction, and when I took one of my first creative writing classes several years ago, the teacher was a retired detective, and he wrote fiction too. And yet the class had people writing many different genres. And so I started this book because we had to hand in a first 20 pictures of our stories or poems or whatever we were doing. And so I handed it in, and he gave me some critiques. And I thought, I wasn't sure I was going to finish it. But later on, when I heard about what's going on, particularly in our country and that sort of thing, I became very passionate about warning the girls. Many people ask, what is white slave trade? Even though it is now known as human trafficking. But back then, it was because of all of these, not all of these, but some of the girls who ran away in Europe to come to the city for fame and fortune were white. But it really was a misnomer back then, because the same thing was happening in reverse. North African girls would be kidnapped into what they would call the lucrative European market. So it was, I think, quite a misnomer, since it emphasized mainly the white girls. That's why I'm glad that they have changed it to human trafficking, because everybody's involved in it. I know that these days, a lot of the police departments are training their policemen to identify that when they stop somebody. And usually, you see vans filled with girls being driven by some guy. This is what I've heard. And if they were to stop the van, a lot of those girls are in the kind of a drug state, and they have no ID. So they're probably being trafficked. I've heard that a lot of them give them money or take them out and wine and dine them. And as I said before, they have a lot of money, because this is a big money maker in this business. And once they're with the trafficker, they're never seen again. In addition to that, the cartels are into this business big time, and they have many fingers all over the place in different things that can attract girls. Well, usually it has a horrendous oppressive effect on them, because they're held beyond their means, and they're treated harshly, and they're scared to death all the time that if they don't do what they're told to do, they won't be around for much longer. Well, and some of them are so oppressed that it has an effect on them and their families, and they get to the point where sometimes they commit suicide. And because they think or they know that they're going to be killed, or they're going to be whisked away to some land where no one will ever see them ever again. And it's hard to come back from that. As I mentioned before, we have the police departments who are being trained in it and being trained to watch for human traffickers or girls being trafficked. We have UNESCO around the world who has different departments regarding women and children, and one of them has to do with fighting human trafficking. Unfortunately, in our country, as long as we have open borders, that's not fighting human trafficking, because you have to have something to keep them out and to keep it harder for them to traffic children and women over our border. What I would say is, if you're traveling, really try not to travel alone too much, or if you're going to travel alone, go on an organized tour with a tour guide. If not, go with a friend, and always stay together and know where each other is. And I would say the same for the immigrants coming into this country, is always come with a friend or a group of friends, and keep each other safe. Well, people have asked me, what lessons did I learn writing this book? And first of all, you have to write, well, when you write fiction, and I do, I write about something that's kind of a passionate issue for me, because then it really gets you involved in the book, and the research is really fun. It was more phenomenal than I thought. And particularly with fiction, you're researching places you haven't been, and you're researching ideas that you never even thought of. And so it's really a fun a fun exercise in writing a book. And when you have that put all together with your research and that sort of thing, you can have times where your action scenes just jump right out onto the paper. And that's one of the reasons that when I compose something, I handwrite it on a yellow legal pad. I cannot use the computer because it detracts too much, and I can write really fast. And when you have these ideas coming out in a story about a character or a situation, you just are dumping them right onto the paper, and that's the best way to do it. Well, I've been asked, what did I learn during the pandemic? And I learned actually that since I live alone, I'm a widow, I don't have very many people coming into my house, so I wasn't really afraid of anybody bringing in anything into the house. So I really wasn't afraid at all. I also learned that I do very well being alone, because it took forever to see anybody. Everybody on my street stayed in their house, and there's basically no sociability. But I wasn't bothered by it at all. I kind of like to be alone, and that's when I start thinking about all my stories and that sort of thing. It actually helped with the writing, because there were no distractions. Well, I'm retired, and so I remember one time an uncle saying, you know, when you're retired, every night's Saturday night and every day is Sunday, because you can do what you want to do. But I live in a neighborhood that has a fitness center, and I found some types of exercises that I really like to do. I joined Zumba a few years ago, which is one of the dance exercise classes, and I also joined a weightlifting class, and I had never lifted weights before. These are small weights, but it really makes you feel a lot better. And then sometimes I walk, but I really like going to the fitness center because it gives you a very sociable time. You get to meet a lot of people. I wrote Desperate Search in 9 years, and because when I started writing it, I did not know what I was going to do with it. It was just to hand in a lesson for a class, and I had to come up with an idea. And so I wrote in it for a while, and then my life was interrupted by moving. And during a moving situation, there's absolutely no way you can write a book, because you have so many different details and things that you have to think about. And eventually, when I moved down here outside of Wilmington, North Carolina, I decided, after everything was in order in my house, I really want to get that manuscript out and see what I can do with it. And the more I wrote with it, the more I wanted to do more and more and more. And so with all the interruptions through the years, when I really seriously got down to it and thought I really want to turn it into a book, it took probably just maybe a year of finishing it. And I've just finished a sequel of this book. And now that I know how to do it, I finished that probably in a year. And I had steady writing all along. So that's a manuscript form. It hasn't been submitted to a publisher yet. So it's probably about a year's experience. I really think a book cover is very, very helpful for a book. And my publisher had an excellent art department to do this book. I've had many compliments on the book cover, and I really like it too. So, because I know when I go into a bookstore or something, if I see an interesting looking book cover along with an interesting looking title, I will immediately kind of thumb through it and look in the front of the book and maybe look in the back and see what people have said about it. And I think the book cover is very, very important. So you need to have an art department, good art department with your publisher. In writing, what works best for me is to have a writing studio and to have a place where I can go and write and that I'm comfortable. And it is not at the computer, because the computer to me is not that creative. It's a tool to edit the book. So I have a guest bedroom upstairs that doubles as a guest bedroom, of course, when guests are here. And it's also my writing studio, and it's by a window. I can gaze out the window and look at the sky and the birds, and I use legal pads to write my story on, and then eventually I'll have to type them up to send them to a publisher. But that's the thing that works the best for me, is to be in a writing studio or a writing corner of a room. I love to travel in my life, to see new places, and they give me ideas for my books too. The last trip I took was in 2019. Well, I had a couple trips there, never knowing that the coronavirus was going to come along. So I did a lot of traveling. In 29, I went to Costa Rica, and I also went to Eastern Canada and visited the major cities of Toronto, Quebec, Montreal, and Ottawa. And I got some fantastic ideas up there. And then even going on side trips, you know, when you're on a tour, like let's say you go on a boat trip or you go somewhere else, or you take a road trip, a planned excursion for a day or two along the roadside, you can pick up all sorts of ideas and thoughts. And traveling is fantastic because it helps me with my ideas and creativity. When I had finished my manuscript, I had heard so many stories about people sending in manuscripts, and they were all rejected. So I sat on the book for 6 months, getting up my nerve, and I thought, you know, you've done so much work, you might as well try it. So I'd heard of a few publishing companies, and I started with one. And it was like, I thought, it was like waiting. They told me they could get back to me in about 9 days. And it was just like waiting to see if you were going to get into college. It was very nerve-wracking. And so I had to set myself up for, what do I do if I'm turned down? Well, within about 7 days, I was called, and it was accepted by the first publisher I sent it to. And it was just amazingly exciting. I couldn't believe it. I love to discuss my ideas, particularly with a writing group that I joined after one of my classes here in Wilmington, North Carolina, that was out of the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute, which is hooked up with the University of Wilmington, North Carolina at Wilmington. And they have a great creative writing major, which is known all over. So we formed a memoir class out of that class, a memoir group, and we meet once a month, and we all write memoirs there, which of course is nonfiction for me, but I still like to write memoirs. It's an exercise that I do, but it gives me a group of friends that I can discuss ideas with, and we shoot back and forth with our ideas and help each other. And of course, I mean, I can talk to I've got 2 sisters, and I talk to them, and I've got 2 daughters, but usually I use my memoir class for ideas because we're all writing. I haven't yet marketed my book myself. I'm using Authors Press. They're my sales reps, or they're my author's representative, and they have done a fantastic job with getting notices of my book around. But in the future, I might want to talk to some book clubs here in the neighborhood and just let them know that I've got a few books around and that they might be interested in them. Although my books are fictional, I want them to be realistic. So I'm trying to base them around real issues that are happening in the world today, and then make fiction stories out of them, because my characters, and some of the places are fiction, not all the places are fiction, but I like to use issues to make a point, and it's fun doing it that way, and I think it makes them more important as fiction books. I don't write on a daily basis. I write kind of when I get an idea, but I know, even though I have a manuscript in progress, I know that I have to get back to it, but sometimes I have to weigh things around in my mind for a few days before I can get back to it. Plus, there's sometimes some interruptions in my life. Even though I am retired, there are other things to do. But I know a daily schedule, or maybe a schedule of some sort, regular schedule of some sort of writing, is important, and I've thought about it a whole lot, and I've tried to come up with one and stick to it, but I just haven't done it yet. I've written my own biography before, and actually all the memoirs I've been writing with my writing group are a kind of biography, because they're all about instances in my life. But as far as getting it published, no, I've never really thought of that. Perhaps I could have them made up into a book of memoirs, which would be like a biography, but I'm not sure I'd want to sell it. Maybe that would just be for my friends and family. If I were advising my younger self, saying when I was maybe 22 or 23, about writing or anything I might have been interested in at that age, I would say, do it. Just try it. You don't have to stick to it for the rest of your life. But if you're wondering if you'd be good at something, just try it out and see what happens. You can buy this book at Authors Press, Creative Books, Barnes & Noble, and Amazon. And you can also get an audiobook of this through iTunes and Amazon. My experience with working with Authors Press was wonderful. They were very kind, very efficient. I could ask Tony any question I wanted to, and they really came back with some great answers and helped me a whole lot. And doing the filming with this book was really an educational experience and a lot of fun. Michael did a fantastic job, and the questions really gave me a lot of insight, and the answers. I'm really glad I've had this experience. A message to my family is thank you for being so patient with me all these years in finishing my first book. And that would be for my daughters Valerie and Elizabeth, and my sisters Sally and Patricia. And thank you so much for watching this filming. I hope you found it very interesting, and I hope you'll go out and get this book if you haven't, because everybody who's read it has said it's a great read, and it's a fast read with short chapters. We know we're all busy, and you can read it in a very fast way. Again, this is Barbara W. Teal, the author of Desperate Search: How an American Family Faces the Horrors of Transnational Human Trafficking. I hope you have a nice day. I hope you have a nice day. I went wrong. What was it I was supposed to say? Not go by the temple.